The veterinarian treats stray dogs for free, unaware the volunteers in Heiress who would one day fund his new clinic. Dr. Ethan Foster had made this silent promise to himself years ago, kneeling in rain-soaked mud as he cradled a dying retriever in his arms. A promise that had cost him nearly everything. The small examination room of his struggling clinic smelled of antiseptic and desperation. Ethan's shoulders hunched with exhaustion as he gently palpated the emaciated belly of a trembling terrier mix. The dog's ribs protruded like piano keys beneath his skilled fingers, each one a note in a sad melody only Ethan seemed willing to hear. "It's okay, buddy," he whispered, his voice breaking slightly. "We'll fix you up." The terrier, matted fur crawling with fleas, one eye swollen shut, looked up at him with a trust so complete it made Ethan's chest ache. This was the third stray brought in today, the third mouth to feed from nearly empty supplies, the third set of medical costs his dwindling bank account couldn't bear. Behind him, Marissa, his only remaining staff member, cleared her throat awkwardly. "Dr. Foster," the landlord called again, "said if we don't make this month's payment by Friday, he's changing the locks." Ethan nodded without turning around. The muscles in his jaw tightened, but his hands remained gentle on the trembling dog. "We'll figure something out." "We always do." But the truth hung heavy in the air between them. They were drowning. 6 years building this place, this sanctuary for the forgotten and abandoned animals of Westbrook, and it was slipping through his fingers. Outside, through the smudged window, gray clouds threatened rain, much like the storm brewing inside him. Later that evening, after Marissa had gone home, Ethan sat alone at his cluttered desk. Bills formed precarious towers around him. Final notices, shut-off warnings. He ran his hands through his disheveled dark hair, a gesture that had become as much a part of him as his stethoscope. The door chimed unexpectedly, making him jump. We're closed," he called out, not bothering to look up from the paperwork that spelled his failure in black and white. "The sign says open until 6. It's 5:58. The voice was soft but determined, wrapping around the room like warm honey. Ethan looked up, blinking through his exhaustion. She stood in the doorway, tall, slender, dressed in simple jeans and a faded blue sweater that somehow looked expensive despite its wear. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her eyes, a striking hazel, seemed to take in everything about the tiny clinic in one sweeping glance. "I'm sorry," Ethan sighed, straightening. "We're technically open, but I'm not really seeing patients this late unless it's an emergency." She stepped forward, revealing what he hadn't noticed before. A cardboard box cradled carefully in her arms. Soft whimpering sounds emanated from inside. "I think this qualifies," she said, placing the box gently on his examination table. Ethan's fatigue evaporated as he rose quickly, moving to the box. Inside, 3 tiny puppies huddled together, eyes not yet open, their little bodies trembling. "Found them behind the grocery store," the woman explained, her voice catching slightly. "I waited, but no mother came back. I think they were dumped." Ethan was already examining them, his practiced hands checking temperatures, heartbeats, hydration levels. "They can't be more than 2 weeks old. They'll need round-the-clock feeding." "Will they make it?" Her question held genuine concern, not the casual curiosity he sometimes encountered. He looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time properly. Something in them, a depth, a silent understanding, caught him off guard. "They have a chance," he said honestly, "but they'll need dedicated care." She didn't hesitate. "I can help. I'm good with animals, and I have time." He almost laughed at the absurdity of it, a stranger volunteering when he could barely afford the formula these puppies would need. But there was something about her earnestness that stopped the reflexive refusal in his throat. "I'm Claire," she said, extending her hand. "Ethan Foster," he replied, taking it briefly before returning to the puppies. "And I should warn you, this isn't a proper shelter. We're not exactly flush with resources." "I noticed," Claire said, her eyes traveling over the peeling paint, the outdated equipment, the empty shelves where medications should be. But there was no judgment in her observation, only a quiet assessment. "What can I do first?" she asked, rolling up her sleeves. And that was how Claire Bennett, heiress to one of the largest fortunes in the state, though Ethan wouldn't learn this for months, became a volunteer at Last Chance Animal Clinic. The next morning arrived with pale sunlight and the insistent beeping of Ethan's alarm. He groaned, rolling over in the small apartment above his clinic. 4 hours of sleep. The puppies had needed feeding every 2 hours, and despite Claire's offer to take them home, he couldn't bear to part with such fragile lives. The smell of coffee pulled him from the edge of consciousness. Coffee he hadn't made, He found Claire in the clinic kitchen, the puppies nestled in a makeshift incubator she had somehow constructed from a plastic storage bin, heating pad, and soft towels. She looked surprisingly fresh for someone who, like him, had probably gotten minimal sleep. "I came early," she explained, handing him a steaming mug. "Sorry, thought you might need this." The coffee was perfect, strong and black, exactly how he needed it. He took a grateful sip, studying her over the rim of his mug. In the morning light, he noticed details he'd missed last night. The subtle quality of her simple clothes, the delicate watch on her wrist that she kept unconsciously turning, the way she moved with a kind of unconscious grace. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I know." She smiled, a quick upward tilt of her lips that transformed her face. "But they needed feeding at 5 a.m., and I figured while I was here." A small bark interrupted their conversation as Marissa arrived with Jasper, the three-legged Labrador that served as the clinic's unofficial mascot. Jasper immediately bounded toward Claire, his missing limb doing nothing to dampen his enthusiasm. "You must be the puppy savior," Marissa said, eyeing Claire with friendly curiosity. "Jasper approves, which means I do too." Claire knelt to greet the dog, her hands gentle as they found his favorite spot behind his ears. Jasper melted against her with a contented sigh that made Ethan's chest tighten inexplicably. "Claire's volunteered to help with the puppies," Ethan explained, conscious of how quickly he'd accepted a stranger's offer. It wasn't like him. Years of disappointment had built walls he rarely lowered. Marissa raised an eyebrow but said nothing, her expression softening as she watched Claire with Jasper. The day unfurled in a blur of activity. 2 emergency cases, a scheduled surgery on a cat who'd swallowed a toy, and the constant care of the 3 orphan puppies. Through it all, Claire moved with surprising competence, anticipating needs before they were voiced, learning routines with quiet efficiency. "Have you worked with animals before?" Ethan asked during a rare quiet moment as they tag-teamed feeding the puppies. Claire's hand stilled briefly. "Not professionally, but I've always been drawn to them." Something flickered behind her eyes, a shadow of memory quickly tucked away. "Animals don't care who you are or where you come from. They just care how you treat them." The simple truth of her words resonated deeply with him. It was why he'd become a veterinarian in the first place. Though somewhere along the way, the business of keeping his clinic afloat had begun to overshadow that pure connection. "Why do you do it?" she asked suddenly, looking up from the tiny puppy suckling formula from the syringe she held. "Treat the strays for free when you're clearly struggling to keep the lights on?" The question wasn't accusatory, merely curious, but it struck at the core of his daily conflict. Ethan busied himself with wiping formula from a puppy's chin, buying time. "Because no one else will," he finally said, the words falling heavy between them. "And they deserve care as much as any purebred, with an owner who can pay." Claire watched him with those perceptive eyes that seemed to see more than he was comfortable revealing. "Even if it costs you everything?" "It hasn't cost me everything. Yet," he silently added. The afternoon brought more patients, paying ones, thankfully. Claire stayed, helping where she could, learning quickly, asking intelligent questions. By closing time, Ethan realized she'd seamlessly integrated herself into the clinic's rhythm, as if she'd always been there. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked as she prepared to leave. The question casual, but her eyes betraying a hint of vulnerability. Ethan should have said no. Should have explained that the clinic couldn't afford another mouth to feed, even if that mouth worked for free. Should have protected himself from the inevitable disappointment when she realized how thankless and heartbreaking this work could be. Instead, he found himself nodding. "The puppies will need you." Her smile bloomed slowly, like a flower turning toward unexpected sunlight. "Just the puppies?" The question hung between them, laden with something Ethan wasn't ready to examine. He busied himself with straightening an already orderly counter. "We all could use the help," he admitted grudgingly. As she left, the bell above the door chiming softly behind her, Ethan felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. A flutter of lightness he hadn't experienced in years. He quickly tamped it down. Hope was a luxury he couldn't afford, not with bills mounting and supplies dwindling. Yet that night, as he tended to the puppies in his quiet apartment, he found himself looking forward to tomorrow for reasons that had nothing to do with veterinary medicine. Days blended into weeks as Claire became a fixture at the clinic. The puppies, now named Milo, Luna, and Charlie, thrived under their shared care, growing from helpless newborns to wobbly explorers who captured the hearts of everyone they encountered. "You're good at this," Ethan remarked one afternoon, watching Claire coax a terrified chihuahua from beneath an examination table. The dog, rescued from a hoarding situation, had snapped at everyone else who approached. But with Claire, he trembled less, his enormous eyes fixed on her face as she spoke in low, soothing tones. "Animals know when you see them," she replied, not looking up as the Chihuahua inched closer to her outstretched hand. "Not just as a patient or a problem to solve, but as a soul with its own fears and wants." The simple wisdom in her words struck Ethan deeply. It was what he'd lost sight of amid the growing financial pressure, the soul of his work. Claire had changed things in other ways too. Somehow she'd convinced local businesses to donate supplies. The pet store now provided food at cost. The pharmaceutical rep who'd stopped calling months ago suddenly appeared with samples. Small donations began arriving from community members who'd heard about the good work at Last Chance. Ethan never asked how she'd managed it. Part of him was afraid to question this unexpected reprieve, as if examining it too closely might cause it to evaporate. But the clock was still ticking. The landlord had granted a temporary extension, but the core issue remained. The clinic was hemorrhaging money. For every paying client, Ethan took on 3 strays or reduced fee cases for owners who couldn't afford care elsewhere. The breaking point came on a stormy Tuesday evening. A car accident had brought in 4 injured animals. 2 owned, 2 strays who'd been crossing the road. Ethan and Claire worked side by side for hours, Marissa assisting as they fought to save all 4 lives. They lost one, a stray tabby with no collar, no chip. No one to mourn her except the 3 humans who tried desperately to keep her heart beating. Afterward, Ethan stood in the back alley behind the clinic, rain plastering his scrubs to his skin, his face tilted up to let the water mix with tears he rarely allowed himself. He didn't hear Claire approach until she was beside him, equally soaked, her presence solid and warm despite the chill. "It's not your fault," she said softly. "Isn't it?" His voice cracked. "If we had better equipment, newer monitors, if I could have caught the internal bleeding sooner, you did everything possible with what you had, and it wasn't enough." The admission tore from him, raw and painful. "It's never enough, Claire. For everyone we save, there are 10 more we can't even reach. And this place," he gestured back toward the clinic, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "It's over. I can't keep it going anymore." The rain fell harder, drumming against the metal dumpsters, creating rivers in the cracked asphalt beneath their feet. "What will happen to them?" Claire asked, her voice almost lost in the downpour. "If you close?" The question was like a physical blow. Ethan had been avoiding it, pushing it away even as he knew the end was coming. "The paying clients will find other vets." His words were hollow. "The rest? I don't know. The county shelter is already overcrowded, underfunded. The rescues are full. The strays." He couldn't finish. They both knew what happened to animals with nowhere to go. Claire was silent for so long that Ethan thought perhaps she hadn't heard him over the rain. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed, something new threading through it. Determination, perhaps, or a decision reached. "What if you had the money? Not just to stay open, but to really do it right. Proper equipment, adequate staffing, maybe even a dedicated space for rehabilitation?" Ethan gave a bitter laugh. "Why stop there? Why not a state-of-the-art facility with an on-site surgical center and rehab pool? Why not, indeed?" Something in her tone made him turn to look at her. Through the curtain of rain, her face was serene, resolved in a way that gave him pause. "Claire, this isn't a fairy tale. Places like that cost millions. I know exactly what they cost," she said quietly. Before he could question her further, the back door burst open as Marissa called for them. One of the recovering dogs had taken a turn for the worse. The moment shattered as they rushed back inside. The conversation left unfinished in the rain. Later, after they'd stabilized the dog and Claire had gone home, Ethan found himself unable to sleep. Her words echoed in his mind, along with the strange certainty in her voice when she'd spoken about costs. Curiosity finally got the better of him. In the dim light of his laptop, he typed her name into a search engine, not expecting anything significant. What loaded on his screen made his breath catch. Claire Bennett, heiress to the Bennett media fortune, estimated net worth over $300 million. Notoriously private after a family tragedy 3 years ago. No public appearances since her parents' funeral following a yacht accident that she alone had survived. Photos showed a different Claire than the one he knew. Polished, elegant, distant. The woman in designer gowns at galas looked nothing like the Claire who sat on his clinic floor, patiently coaxing frightened animals to trust again. Nothing like the woman who worked tirelessly, never complaining about the long hours or the often heartbreaking outcomes. Nothing like the Claire he had, against all better judgment, begun to fall in love with. Ethan closed his laptop, his mind reeling. Why would someone with everything choose to spend her days in a failing clinic, elbow deep in the messy, often thankless work of animal rescue? Why hide who she was? And more importantly, why tell him now? The next morning, Claire arrived to find Ethan already working, his movements stiff, his greetings clipped. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and he avoided meeting her gaze directly. "Did something happen?" she asked as they prepared for the day's appointments. "Is it one of the patients from yesterday?" "Everyone made it through the night," he replied, his voice carefully neutral. "I'm just tired." But Claire had spent weeks learning to read him, the tension in his shoulders when he was worried, the slight furrowing of his brow when he concentrated, the rare smile that transformed his face when an animal made an unexpected recovery. This was different. This was withdrawal, walls being erected. She watched him throughout the morning, the distance between them growing despite their physical proximity. It wasn't until their lunch break, when Marissa had gone to pick up sandwiches, that Claire finally confronted him. "Have I done something wrong?" Ethan looked up from the chart he'd been pretending to review. For a moment, indecision flickered across his features. Then with a resigned sigh, he opened a drawer and pulled out a printed article. Her photo, her family, her inheritance laid bare in black and white. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice was quiet, hurt lurking beneath the surface. Claire's heart sank. She'd known this moment would come eventually, had rehearsed explanations in her mind, but now that it was here, words failed her. "Would it have made a difference?" she finally asked. "If I'd walked in that first day and said, 'Hi, I'm Claire Bennett, heiress to a media empire, and I'd like to volunteer.' That's not fair. You deliberately hid who you are." "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. "I showed you exactly who I am. The money, the name, that's what I have, not who I am." Ethan stood abruptly, pacing the small office with agitated steps. "Do you have any idea what it's been like? Struggling every day to keep this place afloat, making impossible choices about which animals we can afford to help. Watching you work alongside me while knowing that the cost of your watch could probably pay this month's rent." Pain lanced through her at his words, but she held her ground. "That's exactly why I didn't tell you. I wanted to be Claire, just Claire. Not the Bennett fortune, not the tragic heiress. I wanted to help because I could, not because of what I could buy." "And what was yesterday about?" he demanded. "That talk about funding in the rain? Was that your big reveal?" Your charity project revealed with a dramatic flourish. The accusation struck deep, piercing the careful armor she'd built around herself. "Is that what you think of me? After all these weeks? That I see you, that I see this place, as some kind of philanthropic checkbox?" The hurt in her voice seemed to reach him. Ethan stopped pacing, his anger deflating as quickly as it had risen. He sank back into his chair, running a hand through his hair in that gesture she'd come to know so well. I don't know what to think," he admitted. "I thought I knew you." "You do know me," Claire said softly, moving to kneel beside his chair, looking up into his troubled face. "Better than almost anyone has in years. The money doesn't change who I've been in this clinic, who I've been with you." Their eyes met, and in his, she saw the battle between hurt, distrust, and something deeper, something that mirrored the feelings that had been growing in her own heart. "Why here?" he finally asked. "With all the prestigious organizations that would welcome your involvement, why this tiny clinic in the worst part of town?" Claire took a deep breath. If there was ever a time for complete honesty, it was now. "After my parents died, I was lost. Everything felt meaningless. The money, the social obligations, all of it. I was just going through the motions." She paused, gathering courage. "One night, about 4 months ago, I was driving home from another empty charity function, and I saw this dog on the side of the road, hit by a car, barely breathing. I stopped, but I didn't know what to do. I called emergency vets, but the closest one was 30 minutes away." The memory tightened her throat, but she continued. "Someone gave me your number, said you sometimes helped in cases like this. You talked me through stabilizing him until I could get him to you. You didn't ask who I was or if I could pay. You just helped?" Recognition dawned in Ethan's eyes. "The retriever with the crushed pelvis. You brought him in wrapped in an evening gown." Claire nodded, a sad smile touching her lips. "My mother's favorite Valentino." It seemed fitting somehow. "We lost him," Ethan said softly, remembering the painful night. "Yes, but you fought for him. You treated him with dignity. And afterward you sat with me, a complete stranger in a ruined designer dress, and explained that sometimes the kindest thing we can do is end suffering." Her voice wavered. "No one had been that genuinely kind to me since my parents died. No one had been that real. Ethan's expression softened, the memory shifting his perspective. I came back the next day to pay the bill, but you were out on a call. I saw the state of the clinic, the animals you were helping despite obviously limited resources, and something just clicked. Claire reached for his hand tentatively, relieved when he didn't pull away. For the first time since the accident, I felt a purpose. I wanted to be part of what you were doing here. Why not just donate? Ethan asked, though the edge had left his voice. Why the secrecy? Because I needed to understand it first. To make sure this was real, not just another impulse in a long line of attempts to find meaning. Her fingers tightened around his. And because I wanted you to see me, just me, before you saw the money. The tension between them shifted, transforming into something more complex, more fragile. Ethan looked down at their joined hands, his thumb unconsciously tracing circles on her skin. And what do you want now? He asked, his voice low. Before Claire could answer, the front door chimed as Marissa returned with lunch. The moment suspended between them, incomplete but not broken. I want to help, Claire said, rising to her feet. If you'll let me, no strings, no control, no public recognition. Just help. Ethan stood too, their bodies close in the small office. I need to think about it. It wasn't acceptance, but it wasn't rejection either. Claire nodded, understanding the caution, respecting it even as it hurt. I'll be here, she promised. Whatever you decide. The next few days brought an uneasy truce. Claire continued to volunteer, and Ethan continued to work alongside her. But something had shifted. Conversations that once flowed easily now carried undertones of things unsaid. Moments of accidental contact, hands brushing over surgical instruments, shoulders touching as they bent over an examination table, sparked tension neither was ready to acknowledge. Marissa watched them with knowing eyes but kept her observations to herself. Meanwhile, the clinic situation grew more precarious. A pipe burst in the back room, flooding the storage area and ruining thousands of dollars in supplies. The ancient X-ray machine finally gave up completely. 2 more staff members quit when paychecks were delayed. Through it all, Ethan maintained a stubborn pride, refusing to bring up Claire's offer even as the walls closed in around him. It was Jasper who finally broke the stalemate. The 3-legged lab had been unusually lethargic for days. Ethan had run basic tests, finding nothing obvious, but his instincts told him something was wrong. Without the X-ray machine, his diagnostic options were limited. He needs an ultrasound, Ethan admitted reluctantly as Claire sat with Jasper, the dog's head heavy in her lap. And possibly surgery depending on what we find. Claire nodded, her hand never stopping its gentle stroking of Jasper's fur. Can we take him to another facility? I've called around. The earliest appointment is next week, and that's if we can pay the full amount up front. Ethan's voice cracked slightly. I don't think he has that long. The unspoken hung between them. Claire could easily pay, could make a single phone call and have doors open, specialists waiting. But they both knew it wasn't just about Jasper. It was about every animal who would come after him, and Ethan's stubborn refusal to accept what felt too much like charity. Ethan, Claire said softly, this isn't about you or me anymore. It's about him. She looked down at Jasper, whose trusting eyes were clouded with pain. And all the others who need help that we can provide. We, Ethan repeated the word carrying weight. Yes, we. Claire met his gaze steadily. I'm not offering to swoop in and save the day. I'm offering to be your partner in this. To build something together that's greater than either of us could create alone. The simplicity of her words, the sincerity behind them, broke through the last of Ethan's resistance. He sank down beside her, one hand joining hers in Jasper's fur. I've been an idiot, he admitted. A small smile touched Claire's lips. A well-intentioned one. He needs help now, Ethan said, looking at Jasper. And so do all the others. I can't keep pretending I can do this alone. It was as close to acceptance as he could manage, but it was enough. Claire nodded, understanding the surrender this represented for him. I'll make some calls, she said simply. Within hours, Jasper was being examined at the finest veterinary hospital in the city. By evening, he was in recovery, a tumor removed from his spleen, his prognosis excellent. Ethan stood at the window of the recovery room, watching the steady rise and fall of the dog's chest, overwhelmed by the swift efficiency with which Claire had made it all happen. This is what it could be like, she said quietly, coming to stand beside him. Not just for the special cases, but for all of them. A place with the resources to match your heart. Ethan turned to her, seeing not the heiress from the articles, but the woman who had worked tirelessly beside him, who understood his mission because it had become hers too. Where do we start? he asked. The transformation began quietly but accelerated quickly. First came the repairs to the existing clinic. New equipment, restocked supplies, additional staff hired and properly paid. Claire worked behind the scenes, her fortune enabling changes, while her hands remained in the daily work alongside Ethan. They developed a rhythm, a partnership that extended beyond the clinic walls. Late nights reviewing plans for the new facility led to takeout dinners in Ethan's apartment. Professional consultations blurred into personal conversations that stretched until dawn. The tension between them evolved, deepening into something neither was ready to name, but both increasingly relied upon. 3 months after Claire's revelation, they stood together on an empty lot across town. 5 acres of land that had once housed an abandoned community center, now cleared and ready for construction. The Last Chance Animal Hospital and Rehabilitation Center? Claire read from the architectural plans spread before them. What do you think? Ethan surveyed the space, trying to reconcile the weed-choked lot with the state-of-the-art facility depicted in the renderings. Surgical suites, recovery wards, outdoor rehabilitation areas, housing for long-term cases, and even an educational center for community outreach. It's incredible, he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. But are you sure about the name? This is your project too. Claire shook her head firmly. Last Chance was yours before I ever came along. That name means something. To the community, to the animals, to you. She hesitated, then added softly, to me? Their eyes met, the unspoken growing stronger between them. Over the months, as they'd worked side by side, turning dreams into blueprints, something had been building. A connection neither had planned for. Both had tried to resist. Claire, Ethan began, her name catching in his throat. Before he could continue, his phone rang, an emergency at the clinic demanding immediate attention. The moment fractured, the words unspoken once again. The groundbreaking ceremony 3 weeks later drew unexpected attention. What Claire had envisioned as a small private event somehow caught media interest when word spread that the reclusive Bennett Heiress was funding a multi-million-dollar animal hospital. I'm sorry, Claire apologized as reporters gathered at the edges of the site, cameras flashing. I never wanted this to become a spectacle. Ethan surprised her by taking her hand firmly in his. Let them watch, he said. Let them see what's possible when people care more about making a difference than getting credit for it. They stood together as the ceremonial first shovel broke ground, cameras capturing the moment. Not for the social pages Claire had once frequented, but for the local news, where their story might inspire others. Construction moved swiftly. Summer faded into fall, and fall chilled into winter. Through it all, they continued operating the original clinic, saving every animal they could while watching their vision take physical form across town. It was during a rare snowfall in early December that everything changed. They'd been working late at the clinic, a complicated surgery on a rescued pit bull keeping them well past midnight. Exhausted but triumphant, they finally headed to Ethan's apartment above the clinic, too tired to drive home. We make a good team, Ethan said quietly as they sat on his worn sofa, mugs of hot chocolate warming their hands. Through the window, snow continued to fall, muffling the city sounds, creating a cocoon of silence around them. The best? Claire agreed, her eyes heavy with fatigue but her smile genuine. Ethan studied her face in the soft lamplight. No makeup, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, a smudge of antiseptic still visible on her cheek. She had never looked more beautiful to him. Why did you really come back? He asked suddenly. After that first night with the retriever? The real reason. Claire's eyes widened slightly at the unexpected question. She set down her mug, considering her answer carefully. I told you about finding purpose, about wanting to help. She began slowly. That was all true, but there was something else. Her voice softened. When I brought in that dying dog wrapped in silk and tears, you looked at me, really looked at me, and saw nothing but another human being in pain. Do you know how rare that is when people know who I am? To be seen as just a person? She drew a shaky breath. And then as we worked together these past months, that feeling only grew stronger. You pushed back when you disagreed with me. You challenged my ideas. You treated me like a partner, not a patron. Her eyes met his. You have no idea how precious that is. The honesty in her words struck Ethan deeply. He set his own mug down, turning toward her fully. I see you, Claire, he said, his voice low and intense. I've always seen you. The money, the name, they're part of you, yes. But they're not what makes you stay up all night with sick puppies, or talk frightened dogs out from under tables, or hold the hands of crying children when we can't save their pets. His own hand reached up, brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "I see your heart. I always have." The touch of his fingers against her cheek broke something loose inside Claire. A final barrier she'd maintained, even as they'd grown closer. Without thinking, she leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question asked and answered in the press of lips, the sigh of breath. It deepened slowly, months of unspoken feelings finally finding expression. When they finally pulled apart, both were trembling slightly. "I've wanted to do that since the night in the rain," Ethan confessed, his forehead resting against hers. Claire's laugh was soft, breathless. "I've wanted you to since the day you let me bottle feed those puppies." Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the city in a blanket of white. Inside, wrapped in the warmth of newfound honesty, they talked until dawn, about the past they'd both been running from, the present they'd built together, and the future suddenly opening before them. Spring arrived with the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings. The Last Chance Animal Hospital and Rehabilitation Center stood completed, a modern facility of glass and sustainable materials that somehow managed to feel welcoming rather than institutional. The night before the official opening, Ethan and Claire walked through the empty halls together, their footsteps echoing on polished floors. Tomorrow, these spaces would be filled with animals and people, the work they dreamed of finally realized in full. "I still can't believe it's real," Ethan said, his voice hushed with wonder. They stopped before the wall of the main reception area, where a mural depicted the silhouettes of animals against a rising sun. Beneath it, a simple plaque read, "For every creature that needs a second chance, and for the people who give them one." Claire squeezed his hand, her engagement ring catching the light. The proposal had come just weeks ago, on the anniversary of the night she'd first brought in the puppies. Simple, heartfelt, and perfectly them. "It's real," she assured him. "And it's just the beginning." They continued their tour, checking each room one final time. The state-of-the-art surgical suites, the recovery wards with their comfortable beds, the rehabilitation pools and exercise yards. Each space represented not just Claire's fortune, but their shared vision, their combined expertise. In the center of the facility was a special room, glass-walled and filled with natural light. Inside, 3 young dogs played, Milo, Luna, and Charlie, the puppies who had first brought them together, now healthy adolescents awaiting their forever homes. "They were our first family," Claire said softly, watching the puppies tumble over one another. Ethan's arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her close. "Not the last." The double meaning wasn't lost on either of them. They talked about the future, children, expansion of the center to other locations, all the possibilities that lay ahead. "Dr. Foster, Ms. Bennett," a voice called from the entrance. One of their new staff members hurried toward them, slightly out of breath. "I know we don't officially open until tomorrow, but there's a situation. Animal Control just found a group of abandoned dogs in a foreclosed house. They're asking if we can take them." Ethan and Claire exchanged a glance, an entire conversation passing between them without words. Then together, they turned toward the door. "Tell them we're on our way," Ethan said. As they headed toward the entrance, Claire paused for just a moment, looking back at what they'd created. Not just a building, but a second chance for countless lives, including their own. "Ready?" Ethan asked, holding out his hand. Claire took it, their fingers interlacing with the familiar comfort of 2 pieces finding their perfect fit. "Ready," she confirmed. Together, they stepped out into the spring sunshine, heading toward the next chapter of a story that had begun with a veterinarian who treated stray dogs for free, unaware that the volunteer who walked through his door would change everything.